Good morning. My name is Brandon, if we haven't met. Before we jump in, I want to explain how we landed on Psalm 72 today. As you guys know, I get the privilege and the honor of getting to serve our church and getting to serve Redeemer Network and our network of churches. And a lot of them in the summers will do standalone series. They'll do Summer in the Psalms series. It's just convenient, functional in the summer when we're traveling. And one of our churches in Amarillo plans way ahead of everybody else. And so 8 months ago, they asked what psalm I would preach in August, and I landed on Psalm 72. And I have absolutely no idea why I chose Psalm 72 to preach that one psalm at a few different churches. And here's why I wanted to bring that up. I wanted to bring that up because there was no plan to pick this psalm on a holiday Sunday when most of our people were off traveling and celebrating the 4th. But on a weekend when all of our people are grappling with the reality of tragedy and death and what clearly appears unjust to us, Psalm 72 feels a little bit more appropriate than I thought it would 3 weeks ago. Because Psalm 72, while it doesn't deal with natural disasters, it does deal with very weighty issues around justice and injustice and poverty and oppression. Psalm 72 takes an honest look at the world as it is. Not the world just as it was, but the world that it is and is today. That today, almost every meaningful social debate is about an issue of justice. That an issue of what is just and right and good will bring about the just world that we want, from every national political discourse to local school curriculum. The core issue is what is just, what is right. If you roll back and read the ancient philosophers, all of them were asking the question, what brings about the good and the beautiful, the just world and just life? If you ask almost anybody on the streets in Georgetown, if you're just walking the square on a Thursday night in a cool summer evening, and you grab them and say, hey, listen, do you want a more just world or do you want a more unjust world? Everybody is going to say, I want a more just world. The question's not, do we want a just world? The debates are about, how do we get there? How do we get from where we are to a more just world? And Psalm 72 is going to do this, if you're willing to let it. Psalm 72 is likely going to challenge some preconceived notions you have around issues of poverty and injustice. That most people in our context and our social discourse tend to fall in one of two camps. They either look at people who are in poverty and say, hey, the problem is you. If you're poor, if you're in poverty, that is your problem. It is clearly the fault of your laziness or your fill in the blank, but you're the problem. And then there's another camp that looks and says, no, that's not right, Brandon. The real issue is systemic injustice. The fact that poverty exists at all is a systemic cultural issue. And the Bible is going to say to both camps, you are being way too simplistic. If you find yourself falling in just one or the other, it's going to say, listen, you are being incredibly reductionistic about the world that we live in, about the human heart that we all have and navigate. And while Psalm 72 is not a biblical theology of justice and injustice and poverty, it does have something to say. And so what I want to do is I want to look at Psalm 72 under three headings: the need for justice, the marks of justice, and the means of justice. Okay? The need, the marks, the means. Let's start with the need. Look at verse 1. Verse 1. Give the king your justice, O God, and your righteousness to the royal son. May he judge your people with righteousness and your people with justice. Okay. Righteousness and justice here in the text, right? Let's define a couple of terms. Here is how the dictionary is going to define the word righteousness. It's going to say this. It's going to say righteousness is what is right, what is just, what is moral. It's rightness. It is justness. And so righteousness and justice here, they're functioning as parallel terms in the text. And here's why I think this matters a little bit. Because when we think of justice, often we think of fairness, right? So it's common that we would go, hey, listen, it's not fair, therefore it's not just. But just because something's not fair doesn't make it unjust. It's why when my kids were young, in particular when they were young, I used to say to them all the time, in our home we don't do fair. We don't do fair. And it would drive them crazy. Like they would get furious with me. Why can't we do, what do you mean we don't do fair? Well, we don't do fair in our home because fair isn't the biblical value I want cultivating my kids. I want them trying to wrestle with life as it is and figure out, let's figure out what is right and what is good, not just what's fair. Fair and justice are not the same thing. So, righteousness, justice, what is right, good, moral, function as parallel terms. And the reason why I think it's so critical that we see this is, did you see where it says, judge the poor with justice? Judge the poor with justice. There are two kinds of poor in the Bible. The first kind, it's distinctly a biblical category: the lazy, the slothful, the disobedient, the ones lacking self-control, the ones who, hey, you know what? There are people who are poor and it is their fault. They are to blame. There is a biblical category for this person. That's not the person that Psalm 72 is dealing with. There's a second category of the poor and those in poverty that are victims of oppression and injustice. Here's the Dictionary of Biblical Imagery. Here's what it says about this. It says, both Old and New Testaments offer vivid pictures of the plight and afflictions of the poor and others who suffer the pains of injustice. Although descriptions of the circumstances and explicit causes of poverty are sometimes vague, many passages graphically communicate that the poor are often victims of circumstance, greed, lust for power, and exploitation. The poor are often prey to the cruelty of those in power. This is the category of poor, of those in poverty, that Psalm 72 is dealing with. And Psalm 72 is saying, listen, everybody who is a victim of poverty, everybody who is gripped with and grappling with the reality of poverty, it's not always their fault. I know that is a thoroughly un-Texan statement to say, but it's what the Bible has to say. That it is not always their fault. Some are in poverty because they are victims of injustice. They are victims of the existence of injustice in the world. And so what is life like for the poor that are being addressed here? Look at verse 4 with me. A couple of key words in here. May he defend the cause of the poor of the people. May he give deliverance to the children of the needy and crush the oppressor. Okay. So what is life like for the Psalm 72 poor, those in poverty? Life is marked by being vulnerable, being exploited, and being oppressed. Vulnerable. This is the need to be defended. Those that are vulnerable, they need to be defended. They need their cause defended. They lack access to power. They don't simply have the power to defend themselves. Let's bring this forward and apply this today in real life. If somebody who is in complete poverty, and I'm just going to label somebody who is homeless without a home, versus myself, if we were to both get falsely accused of a crime, I have vastly more resources at my disposal to defend myself. Through my social network, through my family's social network, through simply the financial resources that I have at my own disposal, through the financial resources that my friends have at their disposal, that my family has at their disposal, I have vastly more resources to defend myself. The person who has no resources does not have the same ability to defend themselves that I do. They are far more vulnerable than I am. So Mark 1, they're vulnerable and need to be defended. 2, they're exploited. Give deliverance to the children of the needy. They need to be delivered. The word delivered, it's to be liberated from external evils. And often the vulnerable, the poor, they're taken advantage of by the powerful, by those with more power, more cachet than they have. They get taken advantage of. That here's the way the world works. The world around us, it works like this. Those in power often want more power, right? I've got money and I want more money. That's why when we talk about the nature of the kingdom in the church, it's upside down. We don't use power to get power. We don't use money to get money. We take what we have and use it for the good of others. It's inverting the ways of the world. Generally speaking, they are exploited because people with power want more power, and they are vulnerable. And then oppressed, kept in poverty by people and systems. The idea here is of being extorted by being kept in poverty, by extortion, by oppression. And did you see the little phrase, give deliverance to the children of the needy? To the children of the needy? The Bible teaches the reality of generational injustice. Generational injustice that gets passed down to the children of the vulnerable, children of the exploited and oppressed, can't just rip themselves out of their situation, can't just on their own change their situation. That for most of history, in most of the world, if you are born into wealth, you remain wealthy and society benefits you. And if you're born into poverty, you remain poor and society holds you there. And I'm very aware that that statement has been more and less true at different times in different places throughout history. However, for most of history in most of the world, it is a true statement. And to ignore that is to say, I don't want to understand the Bible as it really is. And to ignore that means I'm not able to see the vision of the world that is to come that the Bible paints in all of its glory and fullness and redemption. If you want to understand the Bible, you have to see that this is true in the majority of time, in the majority of places, and not just read the Bible through the lens of where you live in 2025. So let me give 2 modern day examples of this. One positive, one negative. I warned you this is weighty. I have no idea why I picked this or how we landed on a July 4th weekend for it. I feel as uncomfortable as you do, I promise. Here's a positive example of how this works. One in which has benefited my family. My wife is from Santa Fe, Texas. My father-in-law, incredibly hard worker. Built their house, and I don't mean ran the crews. I mean him and his family on the weekends built the house that they live in today. In the 70s, he got a job as an operator at a refinery. And he got that job in the 70s because his uncle, who was also an incredibly hard worker, got a job as an operator in the refinery in the 50s. But in the 50s and in the 70s in Santa Fe, Texas, if you were African American, you were not getting a high-paying job at a refinery. You simply weren't. They worked hard, and the world worked for them in a way that it didn't work for others. And here's where the generational piece comes in. That my kids, 2 of whom are in this room, 2 are in the room around the corner. My kids are going to receive an inheritance, and what comes with that, the benefits of not being vulnerable or open to exploitation or oppression. My kids are going to receive an inheritance that is in part because my father worked incredibly hard, was smart and wise. And in part because the world worked for my family in a way that it doesn't work for everyone. And to ignore that is to put my head in the sand and not see the world for what it really is. Here's a second example, the negative example. Before this, before Redeemer Georgetown, Redeemer Network, I pastored a church in Houston. We partnered with a couple of orgs, one in particular that fought human trafficking. Do you know 20% of people trafficked in America travel I-10 between Houston and San Antonio? Most of them coming up from Mexico. Almost 100% of the people trafficked that travel I-10 to San Antonio are from families in absolute poverty. Why? Because they're vulnerable. They are vulnerable to being exploited and oppressed. They are vulnerable in ways that my kids are not vulnerable. The point of this is that there is a need for justice because the world that you and I live in is marked by injustice. So what are the marks of justice? If that's the need for justice, what are the marks of justice? Let's look at verse 4 again. May he defend the cause of the poor and crush the oppressor. All right, Mark 1 is very simply, the vulnerable are defended. That he, being the king, he defend the cause of the poor. Almost every commentator I found agrees this is referencing King Solomon. He, the king, the most powerful person in the land, is to use his power to defend the vulnerable. Not to leverage his power to gain more power, but to leverage his power for the good of the vulnerable, to serve the vulnerable, to support and care for the vulnerable, to make them less vulnerable. Now, key to this text, who are the oppressors? And crush the oppressor. Who are the oppressors? The oppressors are other powerful people. Right, in this day, 100% of the land saw the world like this. I'm in power, you are not. I oppress you to gain more power for me. And the king is to step in and say, no, that is not how the world works. That's not how the world should be. And the king is to use his power against the other powerful to defend the vulnerable. Mark 1, the powerful use their power to defend the vulnerable. The second mark, what's a second mark? That they're delivered, saved, and redeemed. Look at verse 12 through 14. For he delivers the needy when he calls, the poor and him who has no helper. He has pity on the weak and the needy. He saves the lives of the needy. From oppression and violence he redeems their life, and precious is their blood in his sight. So here's mark number 2. The vulnerable are delivered, saved, redeemed. And the words that the psalmist uses here, so the Old Testament is written in Hebrew, we translate it to English. The words that the psalmist uses just paint a graphic picture of what he means. The word delivered, it means to be snatched from an enemy, and often it was used of animals snatched by their prey. It's the same word. It's used in 1 Samuel 17. It reads like this. When there came a lion or a bear and took a lamb from the flock, I struck him and delivered it out of its mouth. It's the imagery the psalmist is using here. The point of the psalmist being the poor are no longer being preyed upon. They're no longer prey. They're delivered from being prey and then saved to be freed, to be saved from battle, to no longer be in danger, to be safe and to secure, to have options in life. And then redeemed, my favorite one of the 3. To be redeemed, it's to act as a kinsman. If you're familiar with the book of Ruth, the story of Ruth, the kinsman redeemer, same word. Same word. The outsider, the vulnerable, the marginalized. You're not just brought near, but you're protected like you would family. Treated like family. That the king would protect them the way that I would protect my kids. Right? Listen, if you're in danger, I'm going to step in and I'm going to do what I can to defend you. And then the degree to which I'm going to defend you is going to be significant. I can assure you of that. And I can also assure you that if my kids or my wife are in danger, that degree of oomph is going to be even greater. The king was to protect them as he would family. The point of the second mark is this, that it goes beyond simply being defended to actual change in circumstance, that victims of injustice would experience justice, change. But there's a third mark, and it's back in verse 7. In his days, the king, in his days may the righteous flourish and peace abound till the moon be no more. Peace abound, be in abundance. The word peace, it's the word shalom. It's complete and total flourishing. Right? Physical, emotional, spiritual, social, just complete flourishing. It's the word that paints the picture for the Bible's vision for justice and what a just world looks like. It looks like a world where humanity is flourishing and that there is emotional, spiritual healing in the land. A world that is just and right. A world that is not marked by injustice. That the marks of the world, the marks of justice are this: that the poor are defended, and that being defended produces change in circumstance, and that shalom flows for all. So how do we get there? The means of justice. One of my favorite things about Psalm 72 that I found in prepping is that almost, I wouldn't say everybody I found, but the majority of people I found would agree that Psalm 72 is really painting a job description for the king. That it kind of outlines what the king's job description was, what Solomon's job was to do. And if you outline what is on that job description, you're going to see four things. That the king was to see, feel, hear, and act. That he was to see. That the king was to see the world as it was, not to look away. Not to look away, not to see it, look away, pretend like it's not there. But to see the world as it is. And then to feel, to care, to be moved with pity, to have compassion, and then to hear, to actually hear the vulnerable, to hear the voiceless, to give the voiceless a voice. It was to hear, and then to act, to go beyond platitudes and produce change. That Psalm 72 was about a king who was to bring about justice in a just world and flourishing. It's why in verse 16, which we didn't read, that it says there's an abundance of grain in the land, that the fruit of Lebanon, its fruit be like Lebanon, and may people blossom in the cities and the grass of the field. That abundance of grain, it's flowing, nobody's hungry. Nobody's vulnerable because they don't have food. And then like Lebanon, it's a symbol of strength and prosperity, that the poor and the vulnerable, they get protected and they get lifted up. And the king's job was to bring about this just world for all. But this psalm, it's not just about Solomon. And let me explain that. Psalm 72, it ends with this forward-looking vision. Psalm 72, so the Psalms in general are divided into 5 different sections. Psalm 72 is the finish of the second section. It's the last psalm in the second section of the Psalms. And the last 3 verses, we think, are really a summary and a conclusion, not just of Psalm 72, but of this second section of the Psalms. And this is how that second section in Psalm 72 ends looking forward. Verse 18 to 20, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who alone does wondrous things. Blessed be his glorious name forever. May the whole earth be filled with his glory. Amen and amen. The prayers of David, the son of Jesse, are ended." Listen, in this forward-looking vision of the glorious name, the whole earth being full of his glory. Psalm 72 is concluding this section, and it's looking forward to this day when the world is just marked by absolute shalom, flourishing. It paints a picture of the world as it should be, the world as it could be, the world as it will be. It's this forward-looking vision that through the king and the kings to come, that their rule and their reign, that justice would flow and flourish and make its way to all. But there was a problem. The problem is that the best of kings couldn't pull it off. That the best of kings couldn't live up to the job description, and those who tried, they came up short on delivering the world that the Psalms are painting. And the reason they came up short is that Psalm 72 is about more than just a king and a king to come. But it's about the king. The king, a man named Jesus, who would come from heaven to earth, the most powerful man to ever walk the earth. The one man who could look at a storm and tell it stop, and it would. One man who could call down legions from heaven to defend himself. The most powerful man to ever walk the earth, who set aside that power to come and to live in poverty and experience the climax of injustice on the cross. Who would be resurrected, who would walk out of that grave as the returning king to bring the shalom of heaven to earth. The king who announced his presence like this: "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovering of sight to the blind, and has set at liberty those who are oppressed." And listen, when we fast forward and make our way through Luke and in the book of Acts, we absolutely see that part of what Jesus had in mind was our spiritual reality, that we are all born spiritually poor, captives of sin, blind to the brokenness of the world and the brokenness of our own heart. And he came and stood in that gap on the cross to invite you and I to his table to be part of his people and his family, irrespective of your place in society. He absolutely had that in mind. But when we look at the life of Jesus, we see he had more in mind. We see Jesus was the king who would see, that he didn't look away from the blind and the leper and the prostitute. It didn't turn his head. He didn't have a blind eye. He looked. He would see. He was the king who would feel that compassion would lead him to touch the untouchables. Compassion would lead him to reach out a hand and put his hand on the leper and the blind. And he would hear that he's the king who would sit at a well and listen to a woman. No king in his day was doing that. And he's the king who would act that through his death and resurrection, he would open the door to his table to the poor and to the vulnerable and the marginalized, to any and all who would call on him and come to him, no matter your place in society. He was the king who was to come. And that through his death and resurrection, he would heal the soul from captivity to sin, and through his return, he will heal the body from death and the world from injustice. And from the days of Psalm 72 on, government after government has tried and fallen short, because Psalm 72 wasn't just painting a picture and an outline for a social government, but about the king who would come. The king whose name was Jesus, who would govern his people with righteousness and justice. And because you and I are united to the king, you and I whose lives have intersected with the king, you and I united to him can be people of the king's justice in the world. We can go out and embody the world that is to come in the world that is, because the means of justice include you, include me, include the people who are his people, embodying his life in the broken world that we live in and around. That the means of justice include the church, our Redeemer Network confession that all of our churches agree to. It says this about the church, that the church serves as a sign of God's future new world. We need a bigger vision of the church, Redeemer Georgetown. We need a bigger vision of the church. We need a vision of the church that goes beyond a place to make friends and to raise our kids. Those are good. I want friends. I want my kids discipled. We need a bigger vision of the church, one that says we together are a people giving a vision of the future world in the world that is. We need a bigger vision for the church. We need to see us together as a sign of God's future world. We need to see us as a people who are to embody the King, who are to see, feel, hear, and act, that we're to see the brokenness of the world and not look away, that we're to feel, to let our heart be moved with the heart of Jesus for our neighbor. And then we're to hear, we're to listen to the vulnerable and to not dismiss them, but to hear them, to listen, and then to act, to get beyond I'm sorry and to making a difference in the world. Rodney Stark, a famous, in my little world, a famous church historian, wrote this great book about the explosion of the early church, and how the gospel just broke into the world all around in the first couple hundreds of years. And he said, listen, you want to know what the church did? Well, in cities that were full of homeless and impoverished, they offered charity and hope. In a world, in cities were full of orphans and widows, they provided a new and expanded sense of family. In a world, in cities full of violent ethnic strife, Christians offered a new sense of social solidarity. In a world full of epidemics, fires, and earthquakes, Christians offered not just prayer, but nursing services, care. That is a sign of the world that is to come right there. So how do we become that? How do we do that? What's my action item from today, Brandon? First, we grow. We grow our knowledge of what the Bible has to say about justice and injustice. We grow our knowledge of what the Bible has to say. It has something to say to the world that we're in and our role in the world that is. You and I simply cannot let our vision for a just world get informed by social media or cable politics. For-profit cable, I mean. Just can't. It can't. There's nuggets of truth everywhere. It is a world made with people in the image of God. Nuggets of truth everywhere. But the Bible has to inform our vision for the world that should be. It can't be social media. Can't be. And then we grow, and then we personally engage. Engage the vulnerable, the marginalized, to learn names and stories. So incredibly proud of a man named Tom in our church last year, who just took the initiative to engage our fellow neighbors, citizens, people in the image of God who are in need. We engage. We can partner with organizations that are serving vulnerable and the marginalized, something I would love to see us do more of in the future. And then plant. Plant churches. I know that's maybe not the most direct line, but let me connect the dots here. We simply cannot be satisfied with just planting one church here in Georgetown. We've got to be committed to planting another church in Taylor, one in Liberty Hill, one in Temple, because we need more communities of men, women, and children embodying the world that is to come, giving offer and taste of the world that will be in the world that is, so that justice might penetrate. Because listen, we are not here, it is not our job to go and impose justice on the world. It is our job to go as a community of the King and embody the just world in the world that is, giving the unjust world a taste of Jesus' justice. And what their life could be like and what it will be like in Him. And we need more communities doing that all over the place. More communities of men, women, children doing this. We cannot simply be content. We must be passionate about seeing Georgetown redeemed, transformed here, and then other communities. Because in the words of Andrew Peterson, the poet, the author, the musician, there will be a day when the last tear falls, when the last child starves. And in that day there is love. Oceans and oceans of love and love again. And in that day we'll see how the tears that have fallen were caught in the palms of the giver of love and the lover of all. May we, Redeemer Georgetown, together embody the world that will be in the world that is until the last tear has fallen. Let's pray.